March 17, 1943. North Atlantic, 400 miles south of Iceland. Convoy HX-229 carved a path through massive 15-foot swells, each vessel pitching violently as the cold Atlantic wind tore across the decks. 41 merchant ships carrying 140,000 tons of vital cargo for Britain were crammed with supplies, food, fuel, munitions, everything the nation needed to survive. On board the SS William Eustace, Thomas "Tommy" Lawson, a 28-year-old ship's cook, struggled to maintain balance in the galley as the ship rolled beneath him. Pots clattered, plates slid, and the smell of sea salt and cooking grease mixed with the bracing chill. Above him, Captain James Bannerman kept a steady hand on the binoculars, scanning the horizon for any sign of enemy contact. Beneath the waves, in the dark and silent waters of the Atlantic, U-758's Captain Lieutenant Helmuth Mansack sat in the control room, hydrophone pressed to his ear. Every creak, every vibration from the convoy traveled through the water. "Contact bearing 280, whispered the young German operator. Multiple screws, heavy machinery noise, the unmistakable signature of 40 ships. The Wolfpack, a coordinated group of submarines trained to attack en masse, was positioning to strike. Mansack allowed himself a grim smile. To him and his men, the ocean was theirs to command. But neither side knew that Tommy Lawson had observed something unusual. Over months aboard Liberty ships, he had noticed subtle differences in sound as ships maneuvered. Machinery, propellers, hulls, all gave off distinct vibrations detectable through water. But when a ship flooded after a torpedo strike, its machinery fell silent. Its acoustic signature vanished. If this effect could be understood and controlled, ships could be rendered effectively invisible to U-boat hydrophones. Over the next 6 days, 22 merchant ships from Convoys HX-229 and SC-122 would be sunk, taking 300 seamen with them. It was the worst convoy disaster since 1942. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's U-boat fleet, would later call it the greatest convoy battle of all time. The scale of loss was staggering. By March 1943, German U-boats had sunk 567,000 tons of Allied shipping, more than any month previously. Britain, reliant on imports for 2/3 of its food and all its petroleum, faced a perilous shortage. Winston Churchill would later write that the only thing he truly feared during the war was the U-boat peril. The Royal Navy had tried everything to counter this. Active sonar, known as ASDIC, could detect submerged submarines up to 2,500 yards directly ahead, but it was ineffective against U-boats approaching from the sides or rear. Radio direction finding, HUF-DUF, allowed detection of U-boat transmissions. But once the Wolfpack stopped transmitting, the Allies had no clue where they were. Convoys, inherently noisy with engines and propellers, betrayed their positions over miles of open ocean. Naval engineers and scientists tried to quiet ships with structural modifications, sound-dampening mounts, or even rubber coatings. But these solutions were impractical or degraded rapidly in seawater. The problem seemed unsolvable. And yet, aboard the William Eustace, a 28-year-old cook noticed patterns that all the experts had overlooked. Observing the machinery and listening closely, he realized that water itself could absorb vibrations in ways air or steel could not. If water could be positioned strategically around the engine mounts and propeller shafts, it could act as a barrier, preventing sound from traveling into the ocean. His insight, simple as it seemed, could change the game entirely. And not just for a single ship, but for the entire Allied convoy system. By the time HX-229 pressed on through the waves, the fate of the convoy and the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic hung on one man's observation. Tommy Lawson's ingenuity would soon challenge every assumption held by naval engineers, officers, and U-boat commanders alike. The Atlantic, vast and merciless, was about to become the proving ground for an innovation born not of laboratories or military academies, but in the mind of a ship's cook. Lawson's insights began in the most unlikely place, the engine room of the William Eustace. In the roar of turbines and the constant vibration of the hull, he could detect subtle differences in the noise that a ship made as it moved through water. February 19, 1943, was the pivotal moment. While traveling in Convoy SC-18, 63 ships in 9 columns, he noticed that when a neighboring ship was struck by a torpedo, the machinery fell silent. It was not the explosion itself, but the sudden absence of mechanical noise that caught his attention. The ship had become acoustically invisible to U-boat hydrophones. Lawson immediately realized the implication. If he could replicate this effect intentionally, ships could be rendered undetectable to U-boat sensors. The idea was deceptively simple. Water-filled chambers around engine mounts and propeller shafts could absorb vibrations before they entered the hull and the surrounding sea. But such an idea flew in the face of conventional naval engineering. Everyone who heard it dismissed it as impossible. Engineers, first mates, and even his captain were skeptical. Yet Lawson persisted, driven by observation and an instinct honed through years at sea. March 24, 1943, brought Lawson ashore in Liverpool. Determined to make his idea heard, he attempted to speak directly to the Royal Navy. Shore patrol officers intercepted him and arrested him for entering a restricted area. But fate intervened in the form of Commander Peter Gretton, a 29-year-old Royal Navy officer who had commanded escort groups for 2 years and had recently suffered significant convoy losses. Desperate for solutions, Gretton listened as Lawson explained his observations. Controlled water around machinery could block vibrations from propagating into the water, rendering ships acoustically invisible to the enemy. At first, Gretton found it absurd, a cook proposing technical modifications to naval ships, but desperation forced a test. Lawson, Gretton, and engineers began constructing a prototype aboard the corvette HMS Sunflower. The system was crude: empty oil drums welded around propeller shafts, sandbags simulating water pressure, and rubber bladders positioned against engine mounts. Every step violated naval regulations, but the potential benefit was too great to ignore. The work was perilous. If discovered, it could lead to court-martial for unauthorized modifications. Yet the potential to save lives outweighed the risk. Lawson's observations, born from hours in the engine room, had transformed into action. In these early chaotic days, the Atlantic itself would become the testing ground for a system that might shift the balance of naval warfare. Convoys, once easy prey for U-boats, could now hope for a quiet advantage. And one man, a cook, might hold the key. March 28, 1943, saw the first real test of Tommy Lawson's acoustic dampening system aboard HMS Sunflower. The ship moved cautiously into the Mersey River as the crew waited tensely. Submerged 500 yards away, HMS Trespasser monitored the ship's noise through hydrophones. Initial readings were disappointing. The U-boat could detect the Sunflower just as easily as before. Lawson realized the problem. The water-filled rubber bladders and oil drums around the propeller shafts were leaking. For 3 days, he, Commander Gretton, and Engineer Lieutenant Whitby reinforced the chambers, sealed the bladders, and positioned water precisely against machinery mounts. Each adjustment was based on careful observation of how vibrations traveled through the hull into the water. April 2nd brought the second test. The Sunflower ran at full speed, and the submarine reported, "We lost you at 400 yards. Hydrophones, which once detected ships from 12 miles away, now picked up only ambient river sounds. The principle worked. Water-filled chambers and bladders drastically reduced acoustic signature. The implications were enormous. A low-cost, rapidly installable system could make merchant ships nearly invisible to U-boats, saving lives and cargo. Yet controlled tests were one thing. Real North Atlantic conditions were unpredictable. Storms, enemy fire, and human error would challenge the system. But Lawson's idea, born from simple observation in a ship's engine room, had passed the first major test. Word spread quietly among the crew about the invisible ship. Whispers of hope replaced fear as sailors began to imagine crossing the Atlantic without the constant terror of U-boat attacks. It was a small spark, but one that would soon ignite a revolution in naval strategy. Word spread quietly among the crew about the invisible ship. Whispers of hope replaced fear as sailors began to imagine crossing the Atlantic without the constant terror of U-boat attacks. It was a small spark, but one that would soon ignite a revolution in naval strategy. By mid-April 1943, 6 merchant ships were retrofitted with Lawson's system: SS Daniel Webster, SS James Herod, SS John Davenport, SS Samuel Eliot, SS Benjamin Kai, and William Eustace. Each ship took 64 hours to modify and added 18 tons of weight. Hydrophone tests showed a staggering reduction in detectability. The ships were now 29 times quieter. Convoy HX-184 departed Liverpool on April 22nd, with 6 modified vessels spread throughout the formation. German U-boats, unaware of the changes, began tracking the convoy. Submarine commanders were confused. Some ships appeared loud and clear, while 6 were virtually silent. Wolfpack tactics began to fail, as the U-boats could only target the detectable ships. Over 18 hours, 9 ships were lost, but none of the modified vessels were attacked. The system had proven itself in real combat. By July 1943, fleet-wide implementation was underway. 847 merchant ships received modifications, drastically reducing U-boat detection ranges and crippling Wolfpack effectiveness. Ship losses dropped 85%, while U-boat losses increased 400%. Lawson, a merchant cook with no formal engineering training, had shifted the balance of the Atlantic War. The victory of the acoustic dampening system was not just technical, it restored morale to the merchant mariners. Sailors who had previously crossed the Atlantic in dread now had renewed courage, knowing that survival was possible and that one man's observation could defy centuries of conventional naval wisdom. The victory of the acoustic dampening system was not just technical, it restored morale to the merchant mariners. Sailors who had previously crossed the Atlantic in dread now had renewed courage, knowing that survival was possible and that one man's observation could defy centuries of conventional naval wisdom.